We are so excited to welcome you all to our nonprofit Tableau user group. This is the third one we've had this year. Just this year, for a little background for the newbies out there, Tableau, a Salesforce company, has decided to break out a dedicated sales team that supports our nonprofit organizations, including NGOs, NPOs, NFPs, and associations. So for a quick high-level agenda, we'll do some welcome introductions, and then we'll have a wonderful speaker from CEPEI, Phillip Schoenrock, and then also two great speakers from Urban Institute, Jesse Janetta and Libby Doyle. And then we'll break out into groups, and then we'll finish up with announcements and resources. So we always like to land and ground on why we're here. And we love to share our vision and mission. So our vision is to just empower all nonprofits with data. Our mission is to help nonprofit organizations see and understand their data with visual analytics to further their mission to positively impact society while helping foster careers, create community, and betterment of individual lives. And ultimately, our goal here is to provide, well, this was a national, but we're going international. This is the first time nonprofit specific community within our data family. So here we are. Just to give you a little background on kind of our user group leaders to help kind of facilitate and navigate, I'll quickly introduce, or I'll pass it to Adele.
Thank you, Vicki. Vicki Koo has been at Tableau for over 10 years. She has worked in a wide variety of roles from operations, business development, and sales in multiple offices globally. Currently, Vicki leads a national team, which I'm a member of, whose sales support our mid-market nonprofit businesses. Her passion for coaching and development drives Vicki to volunteer and mentor individuals within underrepresented communities to further DEI initiatives. Back to you, Vicki.
Perfect. Thanks, Odell. So quick intro of Odell. Odell McCants is an account executive on the Tableau public sector nonprofit team, managing all nonprofit accounts in the Northeast region. Joined Tableau in March of 2021 after 5 years in EdTech sales. Graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University, where he majored in political science and was a member of the men's basketball team. Odell's professional career includes many diverse experiences, from serving as a staff member to the United States Congressman, to Big Five Consulting, and even a career as an NBA player agent. As a native of Northern Virginia, he resides in Washington, D.C. with his wife and 12-year son. And then back to you, Odell, to introduce Adam, who's not here anymore.
Yes, Adam Miko, who will be joining us momentarily, is a well-known Tableau ambassador. Currently, Adam works as an evangelist at Curis, a Tableau partner. Before Curis, Adam worked as a senior data analyst in the public sector space and worked for the State Department for over 22 years. In 2020, he was a Tableau Public featured author and earned a Michael Christini Community Leadership Award at Tableau Conference 2020. And I'll pass it back over to Vicki to introduce our first speaker.
Perfect. Thanks, Odell. Oops, not a raffle. Just kidding. So yes, we're so excited to introduce CEPEI. Phillip Schoenrock is the CEO of CEPEI. During his career, he has provided actionable policy solutions and insights and conducted the highest level advocacy and strategic international cooperation to optimize governance, finance, and data for sustainable development. Before CEPEI, he worked at the École de la Paix de Grenoble, advised the Charles Leopold Mayer Foundation in Paris, France, and in the Colombian government's commercial office in Hamburg, Germany. He has advised several international organizations such as the World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, Ford Foundation, and King's College London, and among many others. He has also been a part of initiatives for global and regional international cooperation. Among others, he's co-chaired Beyond 2015 and serves on the board of directors of Together 2030, Core Women, and the Partnership of Statistics for Development in the 21st Century. He is a member of the Technical Advisory Group of the Global Partnership in the Sustainable Data Sustainable Development Data, the Program Committee of the United Nations World Data Forum, and the SDSN, Thematic Research Network on Data and Statistics. In 2018, he was visiting a fellow in the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. You'll find him traveling or training his dog in his hometown in Cali, Colombia. Fun fact about Philippe is during the pandemic, he walked 500 kilometers through the Colombian rainforest with Anushka, his Australian shepherd. So I will pass it to you.
Great. Libby Doyle is a research analyst.
Not Adele.
I'm sorry.
To Philippe.
Sorry, Libby, about this, but thank you very much, Vicky and Odell, for the kind introduction. We are happy to be here with you. And first of all, I was already introduced, so let me go right away about the work that we do with our colleagues in CEPEI. We are a Colombian-based think tank that has been working through the analysis and visualization of data to promote and analyze the global sustainable development agendas in a regional lens, specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I was invited today by Tableau to share our ideas on how we have managed through working with data, our perspective of how this data helps to drive social impact, especially now during times of crisis. So what I will try to do is to take you through a journey of experiences we have encountered with our colleagues or with my colleagues during this very long months of maneuvering through unknown territory. And what I will do is to bring you through this journey first, what we encountered, and then some of the experiences of what we have done in the last couple of months with partners like Tableau, Mapbox, and others, where we have tried to bring data together so that decision makers can first respond and hopefully soon recover from the pandemic. Also on how to map assets to help the UN to localize and also depart their knowledge in moments of crisis and in other times. And last but not least, to work on transparency issues on how you actually measure the progress during this pandemic towards the achievement of the global sustainable development goals. So when the pandemic hit us, we had four scenarios that we were encountering. The first, it was a data tsunami. The second one was a truly digital divide between the north and the south of the globe. We had an infodemic, which we still have, and we also had to face on how we adjust, how we actually be resilient and also reinvent ourselves within creating a data culture in our institutions, or more than creating a data culture, it's actually fostering the one that we had already been working. So our first question that we had was how to navigate through a crisis and connect data to help for social impact. The first thing we saw was the important.
Were you wanting to share some slides?
I will do that in a second, and actually I will go more in showing some dashboards that I will do in a second. So bear with me just another 5 minutes before I go into the practical examples of our work. And as I was mentioning, what are those drivers that we need in order to do the work that I will present? It is the enablers, it is experiment and risk, it is the co-creation and building around a data community, and to communicate and transfer this knowledge through, in this case, data visualization, executive dashboards, and also through visualization and infographics. So the first thing that we needed to see was how to gather the evidence, how to be transparent, how to plan all this during a whole different environment that we're used to, and how do we create create an impact on this. So when the pandemic hit us, as I was mentioning, we had to work throughout this whole time through a data tsunami. Never before so many data had been shared in the world and was available also, but then we had to go from quantity to quality to usefulness. Then also working within the digital divide. Every actor we found and every partner also had a different set of circumstances and had to stitch together a COVID response system and made their specific needs. And we saw there, of course, a north-south divide. In the infodemic, working in creating evidence and working towards avoiding fake news and misinformation. And in the data culture, and I will stop after this in saying then how our examples actually are translated here. In order to drive a data culture, it was important, of course, to find the need from our partners and ourselves in order to work together and communicate through data. It drove a massive change on how we work. And if you were in digital and running your business or organization, you were shown making the most of our data at this very moment. And that's how we worked through this pandemic at this very moment. And what I want to show you in a second, it's what actually came out of all of these exercises. As you will see, and I hope in a moment here from my screen, it's actually the work of two things. First of all, we wanted to be more transparent on how actually the different countries in our region where we reviewing their national reviews on how their SDGs implementation process was going forward. So the first thing that we did is taking all of these reviews that has been presented so far in the previous years, and what we did is an analysis and visualize it through Tableau software and with Mapbox as well, in order to see actually what the countries are reporting and what they were talking about. And let me simply give you an example here of our own country, Colombia, where first of all you will see, now you will actually see it, what in the three times or in the two times that they have already reported to the international community at the UN about their SDG performance and what is their emphasis. You can see now in one chart actually where their emphasis lies on SDGs 1, 3, and 8, and 17. That means a big concentration on the reduction of poverty, the good health and well-being, and decent work and economic growth and partnerships. Where we don't see right now a big gathering of attention and also of information is how they are actually reporting marine life, climate change related issues, which were to be reported until this actually year in 2020. So it is important to mention here, first of all, to create tools that create transparency and also can compare. First of all, we want to know how this actually looks like towards all other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, those 33 or 32 other countries besides Colombia. And if we want then to actually see, as we love soccer in our region and we always compare everything to those that we are competing with, let's start with Argentina. Here you actually can see how countries are reporting and how to compare actually the emphasis on the analysis that can be created through data visualization, through the analysis. And the most interesting thing is actually to track down here as I'm presenting all of those results that you can look up for each of the SDGs that are mentioned in here, that it brings you forward that information in each of the reports that has been presented to the international community. This is simply one example to show you. The second one, it's a work that we have done with the UN leadership in reforming or helping to reform and supporting through critical analysis and support and knowledge management, the UN reform efforts to transform the UN development system. And what we did actually with the different agencies, funds and programs, and also the regional commissions, it's in record time bring together all the information we needed on how the regional level actually works in the UN, and seeing and starting to see from simple work on the office count, on how many offices are actually there, basic information that had been dispersed throughout the UN, what are the fundings, what is the core funding, the additionals, and where the staff is located in all of this. And this is simply to show you the different information that we have here, starting with the headcounts, the budgets they are managing, and we could go much deeper into the different regions and see how this is divided up through the different agencies, funds and programs, and how this is being compared also to other regions. And this is actually and how we translate data to policy. It is important to mention here that all of this information was taken from our reports presented to the UN leadership, and then thought how to integrate this knowledge into the reports presented to the member states in order to get their approval to move forward in this reform processes. And this very basic exercise on gathering information, and I say basic, not because it was a hard thing to gather all this information, basic in the results, because it is the basic assets we have in the UN. Now we have to go into also what assets are there in the brain trust of the UN in order to be deployed in the future to the different countries in the 5 regions. But the important thing is here, this has been used for the report of the UN leadership in order to translate this into policy related issues and to move forward in how data can help us to open doors in bringing different development actors together. And those were 2 exercises I wanted to share with you. One on the more transparency side, on how countries are reporting and actually on how we can track that reporting and the quality of it. And the second one on how a think tank based in the Global South can help the UN leadership to think reform processes through, and also to gather data to make it usable for decision making when it's timely needed to present to member states. So Vicky and colleagues on the line, sorry for taking a little bit longer, but I wanted to simply bring forward our different ideas, experiences, and how we have used the technology in order, well, to make our institutions stronger and present evidence in a much more coherent and precise way. So over to you, and thank you again.
Phillip, thank you so much for that. It's so inspiring, the work that you've been doing and having such a, oh, there's my video, having such an international impact. I will pass it to Odell now to introduce Libby.
And now I'll introduce Libby. Yes, Libby Doyle is a research analyst in the Justice Policy Center at the Urban Institute, where she conducts mixed method research on reentry and diversion programs, case processing, and behavioral health. Before joining Urban, Doyle worked as the legal aid clinics coordinator at the Community Empowerment Fund in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and interned with the Vera Institute of Justice's policy program, which is also one of our Tableau customers. Libby also conducted research on racial bias in police traffic stops and the death penalty with the University of North Carolina's Department of Political Science. Libby's a graduate from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Tar Heel, with a double major in public policy and political science and a minor in Hispanic studies. She received high honors for undergraduate thesis examining racial disparities in public policy indicators across North Carolina counties. And Libby's fun fact is she has a cat without a tail, which I believe is that a Manx, Libby?
She's a bobtail cat, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. It's genetic, apparently.
Perfect. And co-presenting with Libby will be Jesse Janetta. He is our Senior Policy Fellow in the Justice Policy Center at the Urban Institute, where he leads projects on prison and jail reentry, community anti-gang and anti-violence initiatives, police community relations, parole and probation, supervision, and risk prevention or risk prediction. He applies mixed methods, approaches to process and impact evaluations, and provides direct technical assistance to jurisdictions, improving justice systems functioning. Before joining Urban, Janetta was a research specialist at the Center for Evidence-Based Corrections at the University of Columbia. Janetta holds a BA in political science from the University of Michigan and an MPP from the Harvard Kennedy School. Fun fact about Jesse is that he started doing justice-related work during collaborative theater workshops in Michigan prisons. Very interesting. And then I will pass it to you, Jesse.
All right, thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Adele. And I think I'm going to start us off. Libby, do you have the slides? Who's got our slides? There we go.
Okay.
So appreciate the opportunity to talk to the user group about the work that Libby and I were involved with, democratizing police budget data in the District of Columbia. So what we'll do is do a quick walk through sort of who was involved in this, the rationale that was motivating this specific work, and then I will hand it off to Libby, who will walk us through the way we designed the project, engage stakeholders, and some of the lessons that we've feel we've learned to date from this work in order to spark some conversation, we hope. So with support from Tableau, we developed a partnership between our organization, the Urban Institute, where Libby and I work, which is a social policy research organization based in DC, but doing work all around the United States in various ways. Libby and I both work in the Justice Policy Center, which is where all of Urban's work related to crime and justice issues is concentrated, but Urban also has a lot of expertise around state and local finance. Also, we do a lot of data visualization and communication through data as a research organization. And we were working closely with the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, which was the primary partner, really leading the local work. DC FPI works around promoting opportunity and widespread prosperity for all residents of the District of Columbia through thoughtful policy solutions. And they particularly have a focus, as their name suggests, on the budgetary and the public budgeting aspects of what's going on in the District of Columbia. And they were also closely connected to a coalition of local organizations in DC, the Defund MPD Coalition. So why were we doing this project? So the District of Columbia, Washington, DC, is one of the most heavily policed jurisdictions in the United States. Washington has a particularly high ratio of police officers to residents, and that's just looking at the Metropolitan Police Department, so the city police department. Because Washington, D.C. is the capital, there is also presence of all kinds of, for example, federal law enforcement agencies in the district above and beyond the municipal police department. D.C. spends more on police per capita than any of the other 25 most populous cities in the United States. And you really can't talk about policing and equity in this space without recognizing how racially disproportionate the incidence of policing is. And specifically, research and analysis have shown Black residents in Washington, D.C. are disproportionately subject to surveillance, stops, arrests, and lethal use of force by police. So this is really a situation where the prevalence of policing and how it is done is disproportionately borne by Black residents in DC. It was particularly ripe time to do work around police budgeting. 2020 particularly the murder of George Floyd and the nationwide protests against police violence that were catalyzed by and certainly showed up very strongly in the district, brought a level of attention and energy to discussion of police budgeting and resources that maybe we'd never seen in Washington. So for example, there were 16,000 people who participated in the DC government's police budget hearing in 2020. So there was really this unprecedented level of public engagement and questions around police budgeting. But one of the barriers to effective public engagement, once you really get into the details of budgeting, is a real lack of accessibility and transparency around budgets. It's not that there isn't publicly available data on public safety and police budgeting. In fact, in many ways, there's quite a bit of it, but it tends to be fragmentary. A lot of it lives in individual PDFs and sources that Libby will talk about more, and not with a lot of context. So it can take a tremendous amount of legwork to actually assemble the picture of what is going on in budgeting, and also to do some of the explanatory work that would help residents to really understand even what they're seeing around the data. So this was part of what we were trying to get at in partnership with DCFPI in the project that we'll be talking about. So Libby, if you want to go to the next slide. So really what we wanted to do is make police budget data accessible and usable for people who wanted to engage in public conversations about how we spend public safety resources in DC, and really use the data visualization to put this together and create a tool to really support broad public engagement around this very critical issue. And with that, I will pass to Libby.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, so I'm just going to go a little bit more into detail about the data sources and how we went about designing the tool. So one of the first steps that we used to create this dashboard was to create a budget database from the city budget books, which are available for public download as PDFs. So as Jesse mentioned, that can be pretty hard to get data from. So while these documents do include a lot of information on the city budget, the items are often coded for internal use, and documentation is not always legible to the public. So we also used oversight documents to supplement data from the budget books, which are provided from different city agencies and provide more context about the day-to-day operations of city agencies. However, the language in those can still be a bit opaque for the average resident. So as a result of that, we also relied heavily on the institutional knowledge of our partner organization, the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. So as Jesse mentioned, the DC Fiscal Policy Institute has deep expertise in fiscal policy across the district, and their knowledge of the DC budget was really key to building this tool. And further, DCFPI utilized the connections they already have to committee staff members to ask clarifying questions when we couldn't quite understand what was happening in the budget books, and to ensure that we were interpreting the data correctly for use in the data visualization. And then finally, we also leaned heavily on advocacy organizations that work in the justice policy space across DC. In particular, we met with representatives from the DC Justice Lab and members of the Defund NPD Coalition, who offered guidance on both why information would be useful to include in the tool, as well as potential data sources that we could source information from. And here we just have a screen grab of one section of the tool for you all to look at. And then a little bit more about the tool design. So to build up the capacity to actually create this tool, our partners at DCFPI completed a number of Tableau trainings and consulted with data viz folks both at Urban and Tableau. They'd never created a data dashboard like this, so they really leaned on some of the resources that both organizations were able to provide. And a large part of this design process focused on how to situate the data within a narrative to ensure that the definitions of key terms and historical information were included. So it was really a balancing act, but we really felt that it was important to, if we wanted to make this tool useful and to meet the goals of making budget data more accessible, to make sure that we were grounding it in this contextual information. So here's just an example of one of the areas of the dashboard that maybe has a little bit more narrative than data visualization. And then finally, we also engaged with a variety of stakeholders throughout the tool design process to ensure that the information we were presenting was in a clear manner that could be used by a whole broad group of stakeholders. And then the last bit of the tool design and of this project came on the urban side. So As we mentioned earlier, we really wanted to make sure that the police budget data was contextualized with information that was specific to the scope and impact of policing in DC, since it is such a unique jurisdiction. So that resulted in 2 urban publications that live on the urban website. So the first is a brief that focuses specifically on policing in DC and highlights potential investment opportunities in non-police safety infrastructure across the district, such as violence prevention services and other types of services that are not based in law enforcement. And then the second publication that we worked on was a fact sheet, which we have a screen grab of, because we really wanted to bring into the conversation information about what was happening in other local jurisdictions that were having similar conversations. Budgeting conversations don't happen in a vacuum, and as Jesse mentioned earlier, the summer of 2020 brought about a lot of conversations across the nation on police budgeting. So we really wanted to highlight some places that were taking innovative approaches to reconsider how they allocate police funding. And then the last bit that I want to talk about for this project was stakeholder engagement. We really want to highlight this because it was an essential element of our project, and it was largely led by our partners at DCFPI because they're closer to the ground in DC. So DCFPI engaged deeply with the Defund MPD Coalition, some members of which are pictured on the side of the screen, before we even began designing this tool, to ensure that the data visualization would be both useful and would meet the needs of people who are engaging with the MPD budget in a meaningful way. And then once we had a draft of the tool, we brought together members of the coalition to provide feedback on the design and the content of the tool and compensated them for their time. And then DC also held a number of budget trainings to help advocates and residents better understand the DC budget process and the content around it. And then finally, members of the team engaged with policymakers via budget hearing testimony. So we thought that that was something that we really wanted to highlight in this presentation, was the intentional inclusion of stakeholder engagement. And so that leads us to kind of 3 lessons learned. So the first lesson learned is that it's really important to invest early on in building strong partnerships when you're doing a project like this. The partnership between Urban and DCFPI really leveraged each organization's unique capacities, and we feel as though that was key to the project's success. The second lesson learned was that it's really important to be ready to be flexible and adapt to data limitations, especially when you're working with police data. It can be really limited and hard to access. So that required us to be really flexible and strategic in our approach and the scope of this project. And then the third lesson learned, which I kind of touched upon earlier, was that it's really important to engage in an ongoing and iterative manner with organizers, especially on a project that touches on something like police budgeting. The relationship between DCFPI and the broader network of advocates in DC was really important to ensuring that we created a tool that was both impactful and responsive to the needs of organizers. We didn't just want to put a tool out there to just make one. We wanted it to be really useful to people that were engaging with the budget. And so with that, we have a link to the tool at the bottom. We really encourage you to check out the tool, and we hope that it can help spark some ideas about how you can increase data transparency in communities by engaging with stakeholders and leveraging resources on the ground. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Libby and Jesse. This is Adam Mika, a late arriving nonprofit co-leader. So I apologize about the late arrival, but I love the visualization. What do you plan on doing for updating the data to make sure that it continues to engage your stakeholders and the people that are concerned with the data and the impact of it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for that. So right now, so the tool actually lives on our partner organization's website, the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. We thought that because they are so deeply engaged in the budget conversations, it would best live on their website, and they'll be the ones who will be updating it. And they, as of now, they plan to update it every budget cycle and hope that it gets used, as people are thinking about testimony and hearings and thinking about like budget hearings and utilizing the data in there to kind of drive home a point or a different argument for how things should be funded in the district. Jesse, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add that Libby and our now former colleague Leah Sakala, who really led this work from the urban side, and DCFPI, were really working on trying to take a capacity building approach to this. So the idea was, with some seed funding, with the ability to kind of mobilize the expertise across Tableau and urban and DCFPI, we could build a structure for something that then could be more easily maintained. Like once they figured out how to do it for one budget cycle and put that to work, that then the maintenance for as part of an ongoing way of looking at this across multiple budget cycles would be more readily maintained. And there's every indication DCFPI is going to do this for the next year. I mean, with sort of these things, there's always a sort of like, you have to look in 5 years and you hope that there's 5 years of data there, but that's certainly the intent. And I think, really, I think there was a lot of capacity that we were able to build together that wasn't around this when we started. And interestingly, one thing I will say too, in it related to that, if it's not too off, is, we've gotten some inquiries or some contact from members of the DC Council. So while a lot of the focus on this was about democratizing it and making it available for the community, it appears that it actually also meets some gaps in terms of what actually elected policymakers feel like they have readily available to see what the contours are of this area budget.
Were you receiving any sort of free feedback from the public when this was kind of published and posted?
So we definitely, so when we were kind of building the tool, and then right after we kind of published it online, we held kind of a listening session, and we put it out on all of our channels and invited the public to come listen. And we had a whole presentation where we ran through how to use the tool. But when we were going through the process of actually designing the tool and meeting with community organizers, we wanted to be really intentional that we were compensating them for their time. But since it has been published, we've definitely gotten feedback that it has been a useful tool. So
Great. And what were some of the barriers when using the budget data transparency to guide the policy change?
yeah, I can take that, but Jesse, feel free to jump in. I think but something that we really struggled with is that budgets are so important and they guide so much of how policy is created, but they're not necessarily the most accessible or most interesting thing to the everyday person. Once you start talking about full-time equivalencies and overtime pay, you've got people's eyes kind of gloss over. So I think that was something that was really hard, how to make that information both accessible and interesting and digestible to a really broad group of people, so that they could use this information to lobby for changes that they were interested in and kind of make it more accessible across the board for people.
And I might add to that, I think, we really advanced, I think, collectively quite a bit on making some of the basics of this area of budgeting. But one of the challenges you have with this is that public budgets, often in general in the United States, certainly around policing, aren't really organized around the things that matter to people, because there's a lot of, here's what we're spending on overtime, here's what we're spending on capital, here's what we're spending on salaries. And I think what a lot of people, especially as they're starting to think about changing where that money is going, want to know, like, how much are we spending on traffic enforcement? How much are we spending on like responding to violence? How many, it's not organized around the sort of kinds of activity that I think matter to people when they're trying to think about like what happens if we start moving it around. And I think, it could be a push, like that could be like a long-term project to get closer to that. But I think a lot of these things are iterative. You see what you can do with the data you have, and then it raises more questions. And it's like, okay, how far can we get on this next layer? But it is a pretty challenging barrier by getting to the next step and really saying, like, if we move $10 million, like, what does that mean? Like, how do we walk that down into things that people experience in their lives?
Yeah, and to add on to that, I also think that there was this interesting dynamic of there's what's allocated in the budget and then there's what's actually spent. And I don't know if you saw on one of the slides, we pull a figure where almost always the police budget goes over what's actually allocated. So that makes it even harder to understand where the money is going and how it's being spent. So that was definitely something that was surprising to me as we were going through this, since not a lot of agencies have the latitude to overspend their budgets by such large amounts.
So is this model something that could be transferred to other metro areas that would want to utilize this for their own police force and so forth? So let's say Tacoma, Washington wants to use this or utilize this somehow, how would they be able to utilize this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're actually speaking now with a few organizations across the country and kind of diverse both politically and geographically locations to build out similar tools to kind of get an idea of how we can standardize a process like this so that some small town or a city somewhere that maybe where we haven't worked as closely with can use this as a model to build their own. So we want to test it out in a few more places because obviously DC is a very distinct jurisdiction. And I think to be able to really get some key takeaways, we'll have to do it in a few places to think about what the commonalities are and what the different things to consider in different jurisdictions are.
Because I think that would be quite interesting to have a national version of this tool. So you'd have a lot of context in order to review the data.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, I will say it runs into something that bedevils a lot of work on justice, which is that we are so heavily federalized in the United States, and sort of who does what is so different. And so the challenge of trying to have good comparative data around this that's actually going to be meaningful is pretty difficult. And there's a reason that sort of we started from the ground up. It actually ties on, if I may, sort of a question I was interested for, Philippe and Juanita about, because, they had their project, the work they were doing was around that in terms of presenting data across, different countries and regions of the world. I'm curious how that question of like, how standard is this data really showed up in their work? Do you really feel like you're able to make like direct apples to apples comparisons, or are there a lot of challenges about, whether the way this shows up in different countries really is the same thing?
Yes, well, let me answer then to this very specifically. I believe it is, first of all, very important to mention, no, we don't have that interoperability. It does not exist. And it starts with bureaucratic normativities or even fiscal years. It depends on the results framework everybody uses. And all of that brings us to a big data tsunami, but not on a coherence on how to report. And that's something that has been ongoing also in the management conversations, and now on how you actually manage as well your knowledge and your data when it comes to regional assets, in this case of the UN. So that would be my answer. Unfortunately, when we encountered it, it was still a bit nirvana, but on the other hand, we are getting much closer now to where we need to be in having also a standardized set of variables that we can work with around the globe with partners, but it's still in the making.
Thank you for that.
Hey, Philippe, from your presentation, how can the UN use the tool when it comes to like data to policy?
Well, if you see the tool that I presented went very much to show the first one on being a transparency tracker on how actually the countries are informing their citizens, the international community about their implementation and achievement of the Global Sustainable Development Goals. So how do you actually do that? First, you plan ahead. You have several generations of these reports. Second, you are also becoming a watchdog because the quality of the data and what actually it says, governments are aware that people in civil society or think tank community, it's starting to watch and analyze the quality of what it's being presented. So actually, you see it through the work that we do. My colleagues meet with the governmental officials from our region, Latin America, and the Caribbean quite often when this process is in the making, helping to bring all this knowledge closer in order that the reports really go through a quality standard, and that what it said in the reports, actually it's backed up by quality data as well. So you actually translate all these transparency initiatives very concretely into policy when it comes to reporting, when it comes to informing your citizens, and also when you inform within your own governments, because that is a tool that has been used as well. And last but not least, what you can do now is take the information of 33 countries on how they're reporting. You can compare it. You can bring it when you're an advisor to your minister and say, look, this is what we have said so far in the last 8 years. This is what the other countries have said, and how should we plan ahead for this? It is as simple as this, Vicky, in order to bring those tools closer to the policymakers and those that influence them.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Any other questions from the participants in the group? Sincere apologies, everyone, for the Zoom link snafu. It didn't go out in the invite, but we did get some people joining us. So glad to have y'all here. Anybody from the group that have questions for our brilliant speakers? Well, that said, we're actually just a little bit on time. It's amazing. But yeah, we at this point can pivot into breakout groups. So I will just basically create a few groups, and then it's gonna be just automatic, and then everyone can ask questions. It's a little bit easier in a smaller dynamic, leverage it for networking, whatever you choose. And then we'll bring everyone back. People don't like the networking piece. We got Vivian.
It happens all the time when Urban does breakout rooms too.
Yeah.
You see the number go down.
Well, we usually get about 35 to 40 people, and then 15 to 20 show up. The problem is that the the link didn't update from Remo to Zoom, unfortunately, and I felt bad about that. And I saw that when I came in, I'm like, oh, there's only the participants here. So I jumped on and sent out an email. So there's a few more people that showed up.
Okay. Well, I will just close it out in regards to the recording. We still have Vivian here, so I'm sure she'll want to chime in and have some questions. But thank you to everyone. This wraps up from the recording, just our nonprofit user group. We super encourage all of y'all to, I'll send out an email with resources and links and how to stay connected, in addition to a survey, which I'm sure we'll get some feedback this time. And yeah, super huge thank you to our speakers. What you're doing is so inspiring and making an impact and change in the US and international. It's truly amazing. So thank you so much and have a great one.